Welcome back to What's the Point Anyway? I'm your host, Luke, and this is my conversation with Steve, aka the American Pirate. Really cool guy who's had a pretty up and down life, crazy backstory, spent time in prison, come out the other side of that with a really great story. Awesome, sort of humble approach to life. Learned a lot from him and loved our conversation. I hope you do too. If you did get value from it, please like, share, subscribe, do what you can to support the show, get it out there, and give it to someone else who you think might benefit from it. Thanks.
But we, you know how we are here in America, very patriotic about things, and any opportunity we have for it, we do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a child. I was in like middle school when that happened. Just like most guys my age or anyone around, we remember where we was when it happened, and it's just one of those things you never forget.
Yeah, I was I think like grade 5 or 6. So, I don't know, 13, 14. Yeah, I think I was 13 years old when 9/11 happened, and it's obviously we being a different time zone. I remember waking up in the morning. It was like first thing in the morning, and I think my dad had sent mum a message saying like turn on the news, and then the news is on and it's playing, and then we went into the school, and like every single kid at school is talking about it, and then school started at 9 o'clock, and by 9:30 everyone still had the TVs playing and we're watching it. And then by about 10 o'clock, I remember a teacher being like, all right, we have to get on with the day now. But it really changed the world from then. And I mean, I was a kid then. I wasn't really that skeptical on it at the time, but I look back on it, and I mean, I look back on it now. I'm sure you're the same, with very different views to what I had then. But can you imagine something like that happening today?
Scary.
Yeah.
I mean, we're always prone to it, and that's for sure. I mean, I think we're pretty good at security of things, and we've obviously taken a bigger expansion of that since that happened.
Yeah.
And I've met with individuals and especially a bunch of professing Christians that are like, this is an inside job thing. I try not to stay out of that. I'm just
Yeah,
like,
I was about to ask you that question. Yeah.
I don't know, bro. I mean, I've looked at videos and things that's gone on, and I see evidence from both sides. But I also understand is my particular way of looking at our government. We can be very crooked. We can be a very crooked country. I mean, we talk about things of going and placing democracy in other countries and whatnot, and it just seems like to be like this blanket statement. Well, we need to establish democracy in other countries.
Yeah.
In reality, we're actually just doing things we shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'd certainly say as for the country, I'm proud to be American. Absolutely, I love my country. I will help defend my country. This is the land that the Lord has blessed me to be in, and it is a blessing to be here. We have a lot of good things here. We really do. But, at the top level, sin is in the world as well. And especially, we have some Nebuchadnezzars of the day, certainly.
So where do you sit on, it's interesting. I'm being Australian now. I mean, we're sort of like Canada, like there's, like I'd sort of love to be patriotic and love my country, but I think my country hates me, and the country doesn't stand for anything. It doesn't have any values. It doesn't have any united culture. It's really sad. So I look at Americans and guys like you that have this pride in their country, and I may be a little bit more just objective on it, the way I assess it, because I don't have this deep sense of patriotism, because it's like, well, what would I actually be patriotic about? But when you talk about your patriotism, like, what is it? What is it to be an American, and what are you proud of? Do you think, when you talk about the corruption, do you think it's always been corrupt at the top, or has the essence of America been attacked in recent times?
That's a loaded question. I would certainly say, as for I don't know, when it comes to however I want to say, patriotic kind of understanding, maybe some of that's traditional. And when I'm honest, maybe that's some of that is very traditional. I'm not anti-American in any kind of sort. I am anti-government in a lot of ways. I don't like government expanding and involving into our lives. Examples like COVID, where it starts shutting down churches and things like this. That's something that I'm like, there's a point when, the outside view of like a Romans 13, where we submit to our authorities, things like this, as the government. And then there's a point when we draw back and like, no, we're going to not obey you and we're going to obey God in that sense. But when it refers around to I love the concept, and I'm pretty outspoken about it, even with stuff that's going on. We have like deportations and things like that going on. I'm firm with my idea of like, hey, I'll lock my door at night because I don't want entry, because I have something to protect. And I look at that, my family, my children, my dog, my cat, I have to protect those, not only as my blessings from God, but as a man, that's what we're supposed to do. And I look at that on like a grander scale of the country. And when I look at that as saying, well, there's something here to protect. And if I could draw back for a second to 9/11, when all that happened, I was young, but I still remember, and you can look at it in glimpses today. America in some ways united. It was no longer indifference here or here, black, white, this, that, and the other. But hey, we're being attacked. Something's going on, and we have to unite this together and draw together. And I think that's what I love. And I don't find nothing wrong with being patriotic in a sense of loving my country and my land. Especially, if you look at Paul loved his peoples, his brothers of the flesh. He loved his land. There's nothing wrong with that in that aspect. But if we start to make that as like an idol, as if government and country is everything, which I tend to see somewhat in the conservative Christian kind of movement. It's almost like an idol. But when it comes down to wanting to believe in God, when it comes down to embracing what we have as the gifts that we have, we sow the seeds here, we farm the land, we till the land, we teach our children, we protect our wives. That sort of patriotic tendency is what I certainly.
Yeah. I mean, if you read sort of Genesis 1-2 in the way that I do, that it's sort of using analogies to tell a story of what Adam was to do as a representative of God here on earth. I mean, you just mentioned it. You mentioned one of the things in your comment just then. It's like till the land, that we should be looking after our land. We should be looking after the animals, looking after the crops, and I believe that's telling sort of a story in an analogy about how we should be. We should be proud of the area around us. We should be trying to make it better. We shouldn't be like indifferent and nihilist to our culture and surrounding people and lands, which sadly is like, I mean, I think the good, when that's done in a good way, you do see it in America. I think America is probably the best country in the world at doing that. I mean, I can't think of many other countries that really sort of stand for anything in a unified way. And when you get to sort of like Australia and Canada that don't really stand for anything, then someone else's view will be imposed on you, and no one's got anything to unify themselves to fight against it. So you just become sort of pawns to the powers that be that want to impose whatever they wish to do, which generally speaking isn't for our good.
Exactly what you said, pawns to the powers that be. I think there's plenty of dictatorship and plenty of people that want to have that highest of power, and we see it in some global leaders and such. Again, it's some areas I'm like, I try to stay away from like this world government, because I think a lot of that, I think you might understand what I'm saying. I think a lot of that tends towards something I hope we get into is from dispensational kind of viewpoint, these world leaders. And I think a lot of that comes from there, and that we have the tendency to get into. So some of it's like, I try to stay away from, just like the politics. I voted for Trump, and I'm very critical over the man. Very critical. If he does something I don't like, I'm very critical over him. But I think he was I think it's a very blanket statement way of me of saying it, the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
And I firmly believe that. But at the same time, it's, it's such a loaded conversation for that. It is. But there's my Calvinistic, views within me is I believe in the total depravity of man. I do. I'm openly Calvinist. I agree with the spiritual death there, and I think that we see it from Genesis all the way, even still to this day. It's where I hold to, and I think that those outside of Christ, those without God, in that aspect, we're not, just because we're totally deprived doesn't mean that we are constantly doing the worst that we could be doing.
Correct. Yeah. It's like it's the
There's
knowledge
still a
of good.
restraint there.
And it's the knowledge of good and evil.
Absolutely, yeah.
A totally depraved man can still do good.
Absolutely, yes.
I find this a really fascinating subject, and one that I think is misrepresented to a lot of non-Christians. I think people that aren't Christian often hear it misrepresented and think that the lesson is that, oh, we are just totally wicked. Everything about us is wicked, and people are like, I don't really like that idea. But can you explain, like, when you talk about the total depravity of man and you see it in everything, how would you define that? What does that mean?
I think for a good way for me to understand it, and when it boils down to it, where it's separation. That's what it comes back to, as from in Genesis, that we were separated from God. I believe him when he says, for today, the day you eat of it, you will die. I believe that some real spiritual death actually happened there. And it doesn't take no time, bro. Within the time you see from the separation there, and then they're running and trying to hide from him, they see the nakedness of their bodies. And he's asking, who told you were naked? It's there. This knowledge is there, as we just said, the knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah.
And then you see it from there, and then the story of Cain and Abel. And next thing you know, he's like, he kills his brother, and he asks God, "Am I supposed to be his keeper?" This tendency to, like, it's just smart aleck. It's this complete dispute. And you see it just roll through there. Within no time, God's already wiping the earth completely clean, besides those that he has blessed with Noah, and just wipes it all the way out. Now that's a big question for me too, but I don't want to go into that page too much before I draw off. But I think that the fundamentals of it, when I read Paul and like Ephesians, and he said that you were dead in your sin and trespasses, you were dead. He didn't mean we were sick. He didn't mean we were just paralyzed, just crippled or anything like that. I believe that we were dead in our sin. Yeah. And I mean, from back to Genesis, spiritually dead. You may have seen my conversations on X before. I've asked the question, and I'm still wrapping my mind around it as if, hey, we're Adam and Eve intended to live forever in the flesh, and that kind of gets back to my question here, is like the spiritual death. Well, some people's like, flesh is a result of this death. But nonetheless, I think we have the tendency to do things, and even though we don't do it in our actions, Jesus lifted that so much more. He said it's not just about doing an adulterous thing with a woman. It's about just looking at her. It's something in the heart. And I think when we carry out and we don't have that restraint, especially now, take an example of in America and stuff. We have like some morals around the country and stuff, which is great. But I think if you eliminate the morals from around us, even the unbelievers, restraint would even be even less held back. He would do even more and more. And we see this with like abortion.
Yeah.
The restraint's not, it just gets worse and worse and worse. I believe that God does restrain us in so many ways of things that we could be doing, maybe put roadblocks in our lives. But I believe that it's so profound of a thought. And let me just keep it on me. Let me keep it on me, because I can discuss me the best.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know that total depravity makes so much sense to me, because I understand the individual I was before him. I understand my heart's desires to chase after this or after that. I don't have a really humble church upbringing, mother and father. I listened to your podcast with Brother Chris not long ago, and that really, I love his tenderheartedness, and I love, how he refers to his dad as a pastor.
His dad was a pastor, yeah.
So on and so forth. And like, brother, I didn't have that. I didn't have the godly upcoming on that sense. My mother and father, in fact, my father was married to another woman when he had an adulterous relationship with my mom. My mom ended up pregnant with me. And she still chose to have me, thankfully.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that structure of a Christian home in any kind of way. Did I have a godly concept? Well, then that would kind of get me into my thoughts of like, well, Steve, when do you think you were saved? Honestly, brother, I can't answer that question. I can't answer the question as much as I would like to. And like, I'd like to have this
light bulb
road to
moment.
Damascus story.
Yeah.
I'd love to have that. I don't have that. It
Yeah.
just kind of etched in me. I don't know if that was God tugging in me over the years, but I didn't have it. The time I was a teenager, I was already in drugs really, really bad. I did lots of sorts of things as a young teenager, growing into a young man. Drugs was a huge, huge, huge story of my life. I had
Was your mum like a nominal Christian?
my mom she's Baptist, and
Yeah.
she's Baptist in the sense of, at this time, my mom's, she's almost 70 years old, and I have conversations and I try to teach her or express my faith how I can to her, and she
Yeah.
still learns things from me, thankfully.
Yeah.
She's been wrapped up in some things. Our health's not doing all that great, but I have two older brothers. My middle older brother was really into bad drugs. I followed him in a lot of ways, and it's not that he's to blame or anything like that.
Yeah. He was just
He was just there, yeah.
Yeah.
And then we got into other stuff, but man, I think about that when I listen to others, and I hear their gentleness, and I hear these things. And brother, I'm almost 37 years old. I don't
we're the
know
same.
when.
You and I are the same age.
Well, here we are then.
Yeah.
I don't know, and I try to think on it. And earlier I was preparing for this, and I thought about it, and one of my Bibles, one of my older ones, I don't know if you can see it, but this is actually just like a
The life recovery
Bible.
Yeah.
I got this in a SAP program. Now, if you don't know what a SAP program is, it's called a substance abuse program. And because I was in drugs real bad, and I got incarcerated in 2010 to 2012.
Yeah.
And when I got into this,
like early 20s.
Yes, and I got into this, and I started reading, and I was baptized for July 2012 in the river here in Paducah. I live in Paducah, Kentucky, Western Kentucky, and we have this place called the Ohio River, and I was baptized in that. And I remember when I was there, I was thinking this was going to be some fundamental change to my life, bro. This, I was almost going to have like I'm almost in a blasphemous kind of way of thinking, just like the skies were going to open for me and these things were going to happen.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen that way at all.
Yeah.
I'm, 13 years later almost, I'm still struggling. I'm still struggling in my theology, my eschatology. I'm still struggling to try to figure out where I am, but God is so complex. And I think I don't want that tendency, bro, to put him in just a box or just anything like that.
Yeah.
And I struggle with sorts of things like that. Am I a sinner? Absolutely. I make small little comments like, man, I hate it. I hate it. So when I see other brothers like such tones in their voices and things like, bro, I didn't come from that. So I still try to work out things in my sanctification. From drugs and women and a lifestyle that I was so prone to for so many years. I don't desire that. And that's what gives me hope, is that I don't desire it.
Yeah.
When he said, love not the world,
that old life.
Yeah, I don't desire that. I don't want no more than that. And the Lord has blessed me with a beautiful wife, beautiful kids.
Yeah.
And, maybe that's part of my sanctification of helping calm me down. But I still struggle in my heart a lot.
I'm similar. I find, for me, like, gentleness and kindness doesn't come easy.
It doesn't.
I had a sort of privileged upbringing, but parents that were divorced, and I was a hard ass, and and I'm low empathy. I've always struggled with sort of emotional conversations and emotional people, and then I came to faith when I was 33, so I was later than you, but I still struggle with being gentle and kind. That's been the hardest part for me.
I live in Kentucky. We do have this. I don't know if this is a kind of a tendency as well. We Southern hospitality. We do. I've held doors open for women. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. I try to be like that. But I think that's just a thing of respect.
Yeah.
But when it comes to sometimes showing grace, now I think grace should always be shown. Absolutely. But I think there's also a time when we should hold a rod out and and be firm in what we believe. And I'm not going to say like, like a charismatic kind of way, rebuke Satan, do this. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I believe, Sproul said it, not Sproul, I'm sorry. What's his, Spurgeon. He said it one time. What do you say? Strong-spirited people are always called mean or whatever by cowards. I'm paraphrasing in that kind of way, but I understood what he meant.
Yeah.
People standing up and trying to be firm for what they believe and what God's word says. People are like, well, you shouldn't judge. You need to show this kindness.
Yeah.
And then I read stories in the Bible, and it's like,
I was
Lord
like, read the whole New Testament. Yeah,
like at all. Like, and I'm like, Paul walked up in synagogues, bro, and started debating with them on their turf, and calling them out. Jesus called them out.
Yeah.
Vipers, snakes, this that whitewash.
Yeah, he wasn't that gentle when he didn't need to be gentle.
Amen. And it's like you find Christians that are just like they want to define what that is, and I'm like, I don't want you to define what that is. I want to be as true to the text as I can be. But earlier, but when we was talking about Chris, another thing y'all spoke about was sola scriptura.
Yeah.
My conscience holds so tightly. It does, bro, and I can't get away from it. And I understood what y'all's conversation was with the many profess to be sola scriptura, but instead there's sola crede and things like this.
Yeah.
You may have seen me say things, pushing against people on X or anything, and I agree that comes with my eschatological views.
Yeah,
there. But I believe it, bro. I understand you've been having conversations with Catholics and whatnot as well, and how y'all made a comment about one guy like, hey, we relied on them to give us this, and then now we're like, well, what makes just this to be in the canon of Scripture? I think God works all things according, and I don't want to use that in a broad way or out of its word, but I believe that it's supposed to do that, and I certainly believe that the church is still working out so many things.
Yeah.
As a preterist, and as where I've shifted now, I'm sure we'll get into it, is from my full preterist perspective. I guess it's a cheap way of saying it. Maybe we're still in the early church.
Yeah.
Maybe we're still in this early perspective of how things are working out. And maybe we certainly don't understand some things now. Maybe we're figuring it out still as a whole,
Well, I think where I push back on sort of the sola scriptura idea is it sort of comes from my preterist reading of the scriptures. If we read it as a narrative of events that happened and were completed and were fulfilled to establish this glorious eternal kingdom, then why are we limiting all of that to, one book, which is, 2,000 pages or something? It's so much more than that. And you said even this idea, which, I might not agree with you totally on it, but I think it hits the right point that, like, if we're in the early church, it's like, it's a living body that will work things out over time, will make mistakes. You see that. I mean, you see it through Acts. You read Acts, it's a 40-year period. Like I watched a really good video from this guy, and he was like an archaeological sort of scholar on the New Testament period. And he used a really good example. He's like, if you read, like, say, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, he's like, you need to realize these were real letters that were written at a real point in time. So you can imagine, and like they didn't have a post office back then. So like 1st Corinthians is sent, and you think about it, it's like Paul would have been in Corinth, established the church, had people that he knew, established elders, bishops, whoever, deacons, that church is going. Then Paul continues on his missionary journey. Then there would have been like letters and communications come from that church in Corinth who met with, it might have been a Timothy, right? Timothy's with the church in Corinth. And they're like, hey, Paul, like, what about this? Timothy, what about this? Or what's going on with like the resurrection?
Details.
What's going on with the resurrection? What are we meant to do if we have a sinner in the church that wants to? And it's like, it's not like Timothy was like, oh, here's all the answers. I'll give it. Timothy's like, good questions. Let me go back to Paul and I'll communicate it. And then he would have then spent 3 months traveling back to Paul, and he's like, hey, they've got all these. And it's like Paul didn't have all the answers at every point in time either. Paul relied on the guidance of the Spirit. He'd be like, okay, they're trying to work out sanctification. So then Paul is working his way through sanctification, sending a follow-up letter to those Corinthians. They received the letter and like, okay, this is what Paul is sort of saying about it now. That makes more sense to us now. Let's go and live it out. So it's like I think we make the mistake of thinking that the canon, and particularly the New Testament canon, is just like the guidebook on everything that we have to do. It's a snapshot of what was happening in the establishment of that early church, which was a living body working things out, making mistakes, but very quickly sort of transforming and taking over the world from this one itinerant preacher from Nazareth who came and died on a cross and told that, pronounced himself to be God and the one way to the Father.
Messiah.
And then here we are 2,000 years later, and that itinerant preacher, whether you believe in him or not, is the most famous name in all of world history.
I think as from the revelation of, you're right, absolutely. When it comes to the letter, and that's a big thing with my preterism is audience relevance. That this was a letter written to them. If I took one of your letters written to you and I read it in 10 years, I cannot apply it to myself in any sort of way other than the grand pointing to the Messiah. Now, however you or whatever that letter might do, as long as we're pointing to the same Messiah, I think that's what. Now, we certainly have elders, deacons, things like that. This is with Timothy, that he is to establish these sorts of things. Is weird to have this. Great. Traditions in some ways to be passed down. I think traditions can be very catchy, and that gets into kind of the Roman Catholicism kind of thing with traditions. How are we supposed to pass these things down?
Yeah.
But I think in a lot of ways, yes, absolutely. I believe that Scripture is not addressing, I agree with what Chris has said, that it is not about the end of the cosmos as we understand it. I believe that this is the transition from the Old the Old Covenant into the New. That's firmly is what I believe that the Bible is doing. I wouldn't have said that a year ago. I wouldn't have said that several years ago. I've shifted out of my dispensationalism from 10 years ago to push to where I am now, and I never thought I would be full preterist.
So are you full preterist now?
I'm settled with it, bro. My heart settles with it 100%. I've been working it out for several months. The biggest thing to me was I was a partial preterist post-millennial for a long time with your Reform bros. I watched Durbin too, and Doug and Vadi is still one of my favorite pastors. I don't agree with him on eschatology. Man, I love that man. The Lord has used him for me. But yes, it's from that shift but I think Gary DeMar was the controversy really spoke volumes to me.
Mm-hmm.
And mostly just because the questions, and I see these same things, and I'm like, I read in the book of Luke where Jesus says all things would be fulfilled. And I'm like, this is what the text says, bro. This is consistent with other spots, especially with, go back to Daniel 9, which is a good hanging point for a lot of people's eschatology. And it says, seal up vision and prophecy. These sorts of things, and I think for dispensationalists, they have their excuse. They're just like, we're going to push all this in the future. Agreed.
I actually think dispensationalism is a lot more correct than people realize
in a lot of ways, but
they get it totally wrong.
Yeah, totally. Your time. It's just something totally different about it.
They completely understand the first century story. They just think that whole first century is going to happen in the 21st.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things that I'm just in a disagreement with them on, like, especially Daniel 9. I don't think that it speaks of an Antichrist.
No,
I think that it speaks about
telling
the Messiah.
The Messiah and what he would come and do and what he indeed did do. It's like,
amen.
It's the most powerful apologetic for the truth of Christ almost in the entire Bible, and they want to give it away and call it about someone else.
Amen. And then split it, and then for no reason, any reason at all, just we're going to stick a gap right here, thousands of years, and be like, well, God was done with the church, or I'm sorry, with it. He put a pause on Israel, and now he's dealing with this parenthesis era and the church, and it's just like, which I want to touch on that in a minute, where y'all had the spiritual conversation about Israel and such. We'll get into that in a second. But that, I think that's where, that's what they want to do. It's just like, wait a minute, can God not do both? Can he not deal with Israel and the church at the same time? And I'm like, and there's this parenthesis period, and there's, then you get your pre-tribs, post-tribs, mid-tribs, all those guys. Pre-mills, I get it. I understand it. I understand, but the tribs, like, bro, like, it's right here in the text, and I try to point it out to a lot of people, and y'all said something too. It's like speaking the Chinese to them. It really is, bro.
Yeah.
It really is. And I'll make little comments to some of them. Just sometimes I'm a bit of sarcastic, and I don't mean to be. I'm like, sometimes I just want to do it in love. Like, if they just knew me for a minute, I'm like, man, I'm just trying to challenge you a little bit here, bro.
Yeah.
But I think I do come off sometimes a little bit of a
brash.
I don't know, a jerk maybe. But like, man, I'm just trying to be firm and right to the point, bro. Like, I don't want to spend 30 minutes trying to go through these sorts of things. I want to get to this point.
Yeah.
But I agree with them on a lot of aspects. Other than I think, back to the conservative Christian thing I made a comment about is, I think, yes, I believe Israel was a focus point. I do believe that wholeheartedly, the redemption of Israel. And when y'all was having this conversation, this is just kind of where I disagreed, is the idea of you have those people that are Israel only.
Yeah.
And you have those people that is all these sorts of things. Granted, they're out there. My thing is, if I disengage Gentile and the redemption of Israel, if I focus it just on them, it starts to, I don't know, maybe it's just where I'm at, bro, but things start to fall apart for me.
Yeah.
I mean, it certainly doesn't start to make sense, because if that's the case, and I look at things like Ezekiel 36, and I think back to maybe this is my Calvinistic traditions in me or anything like that. I think the things like the being totally depraved and Jesus telling us to be born again. Now, I get the concept of saying, well, this is supposed for Israel, that they needed to be born again out of this.
Yeah.
Well, then what would be the point of Paul saying to the Galatians, who were Gentiles, that you were dead in your sin and trespasses, but you have been made alive? Is the same language. Ezekiel 36, where he says, he's speaking to Israel, the house of Israel. And he's speaking to them. He says, I will put my spirit within you. I will teach you my commands and my ordinances. But it's not referring to Gentiles in any way. It sounds as if it's only speaking to Israel.
Yeah.
And so then my problem becomes, it's like, wait a minute. Either I'm nothing to do with this at all, or I'm part of that ecclesia. And I look to the martyr Stephen, where he says that the ecclesia was in the wilderness.
Yeah.
The congregation, the church, the same terminology is being used, and it's God's people. And then I go back to people like Abraham, and I'm like, all right, well, if we tie that with Romans 9, which, yes, I mean, I understand both conversations for Romans 9 of saying, well, this is corporate, and then there's the individual. A lot of me holds to corporate, but it's also speaking individual, because it's just the more detailed.
Corporate is a group of individuals.
Yeah, and it's like it's speaking kind of both languages there. I'm like, I get it, but I'm like, this is this same type of language. Or like Jesus saying in John 10, he said, I have sheep not of this fold. And he was referring to the grasping of the Gentiles also being brought near, as Galatians that Paul speaks about, that you were far off, but you have been brought near. These going back to Abraham, and this is before his son Jacob, before Israel is even like here yet. This goes back to Abraham and to the promise to the father of many nations. Many nations are going to be blessed. This is where it goes back to, and that's where the core. Or I read things and saying, all right, well, it's not about the flesh. Now, I'm not out here like I'm a spiritual Jew. That's not what I'm saying. But I believe in election. I believe that Israel was that point. And Paul says that these are things, the types and shadows. And I think that God had a people, Israel. He had a people for himself. All those outside of them, they couldn't come through unless they converted into that to become one of God's people, to be brought near. It's the same concept now, those outside to be brought near, but Jesus is that deliverer. He is that shepherd that brings us near. And I think that's the grasping of the bigger picture. And that's where I'm like, all right, well, predestination, election, and stuff like this. And I've had conversations with dispensationalists of saying, well, election was just the Jews.
Yeah.
It falls apart for me, bro. The Bible doesn't make sense to me, and maybe it's a lens I'm reading it into, but a lot of my convictions are saying, no, this isn't. That I believe that he has a people, a remnant, not only just in an Israel context, but a bigger context of history, and that he is drawing those in. So I look at Israel as that type and shadow. Is that the writer of Hebrews even speaks about these things that was passing away, but we look to a greater one, to a tabernacle not built by human hands.
Yeah.
The one of God's tabernacle. And that applies to, because some of it just doesn't make sense to me if I it sounds too dispensational. These two brides, these two things, these two Israel church, it sounds dispensational to me, and it scares me to look at it that way. And I'm just like, this is a type of, maybe this is just where I'm at, bro. Maybe it's just where I'm at. But when I read it and I see that even him speaking to them, and he says that you were dead, but you've been brought near, you are here, these sorts of things. And I don't want to go on to feel good gospel, but I believe that God certainly gets into the individual even more, even not just his church, not just the body, which we are members of this body that make up a whole body. Yes. But I believe that he wept when Lazarus, even though he knew it, he said was going to happen. I think he still touches us.
Yeah.
In ways. I believe he's very real. And I don't know if that's, it just makes more sense to me to read scripture that way. Maybe, am I wrong? I don't know. But sometimes I try to draw back from making everything so complex, of hitting this check mark, this check mark, this check mark, this check mark. And I believe, I think there's certainly fundamental things to understand. Absolutely. But I believe in the simplicity and the sovereignty in his grace is such abounding. I think those are big things that have to be expressed. That we wasn't, back on me, I wasn't looking for him, bro. I was lost in my life, my drugs, alcohol, women, prison, all these sorts of things. I wasn't looking for him. But that I was that sheep, bro, that ran off. Now, we can go on a prodigal son concept, and I get it. That's not I agree with you. That has to do with Israel.
Yeah.
But again, I think these are sorts of things that just maybe they have a purpose. And this kind of goes back to the sola scriptura thing, is that these all have a context for which they were written.
Yeah.
But nothing is new under the sun, according to Ecclesiastics. Nothing is new. All these things are the same. We still have the same tendency, the same things to go on. And I think for the goodness of the gospel within the heart of it is this, whom this Messiah was, this promised Messiah that we read about in the Old Testament, when he says that all these things were written about me. I believe those. I believe him. And I believe, as in Hebrews 4:16, is that we, this is the greatest privilege, is that I get to go into my locked room, close the door, lock the door, get on my knees, and pray to him. And I'm in his parousia. I'm in his presence. I'm there because he's within me, as the individualistic making up the same corporate body. And then when I get to share in the same truth with brothers and sisters that I know, as however you want to say the word elect, I don't care. I'm not one of those Calvinistic kind of guys like, well, it's only the elect. If you're not the elect, well, I get it, man. The gospel needs to go to everyone. Let God do the watering. We just plant the seed.
Yeah.
I look at these sorts of things, and it's where the goodness of the gospel really makes sense. When we get ourselves out of the way. And you haven't really asked me that question yet, but I'll go ahead and answer to it anyways.
What's the point?
What's the point? That's the point. It's to glorify God, to know him. And I don't want to be like, I'm not one of those guys that like, well, let go of religion, I want relationship. Absolutely. I'm not one of those people, because that's so broad. I think God has a systematic way he wants to be represented, worshipped, things like that sort. But I do believe when it comes down to things that maybe and I don't want to imagine things, but I imagine the things that aren't written, and I'm not going outside the sola scriptura thing for myself in this. Don't take me wrong on this in my way, but I'm saying there's some things that aren't written. The laughter, the tears, the hugs, the things like that these apostles experienced with him. They loved him.
Yeah.
I mean, they loved him and he loved them. Think of memories with brothers or sisters and things, and the love you have, for them, the tears you shed. I mean, they had problems, everyday issues. They had struggles. And I'm sure a lot of them brought those things to him. At the same time, I think keeping our eyes on him and not so much on that, I don't want to take symbolism out of him walking on water, but things like that. He was showing who he was. It was a sign of who he was. The works that I do, if he said, if I don't do these sorts of things, don't believe me. There's all kinds of miracles and things that he did. But I think there's more to that in that story that we can grasp, keeping our eyes on him, who he is. And I don't want to get really evangelical, kind of soft, like this is a person. That's not what I'm trying to do. But I do believe in a relationship way, because when for myself, and not that I'm anybody, but I feel like that same tax collector that even couldn't look upon God, and he sat in the distance and pound his chest, knowing as a sinner. And when I feel that way, bro, that's where I want to be, at his feet. I don't want praise. I don't want any of these sorts of things, and then maybe we'll get into the resurrection conversation. I talk with individuals, and it wasn't a big deal for me to let that go. People are like, well, you deny the resurrection. I've heard it, bro. Like, you deny the resurrection of the saints, you deny the gospel. How so? Nobody's explained that to me yet, because I don't deny the physical resurrection of Jesus in any sort of way. I don't deny the physical ascension, nothing along them lines. Now, where that went about after he left, I don't know. I think the Bible's silent about that. It's not for me to pick at, but I believe that he physically got up and he physically did these sorts of things. So there's so much theology is a deep topic.
It is. Well, so the other thing, like, as you're talking about some of these stories, and you're like, you use the prodigal son.
Yes.
You're like, this is a story about Israel. It makes total sense to me.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean it can't be a very true story for us as individuals as well. And it's like, I've heard, I don't know how much you've gone into the whole Israel only crowd, and I don't pay too much attention to them, because I think they bring in, these are just guys that don't want to believe and get intellectual, and then they bring in presuppositions that they must use in order to have their system work. They're not really interested in trying to find out what the truth of it is. But there's a lot of guys in this Israel only sort of movement that will they'll try to just say that the scriptures are just another myth. And, you can see these similar stories in all these other ancient mythologies. And they'll make that point as if it's a win, and saying, hey, like, because we see things that Jesus did in stuff that happened in 500 BC in other cultures, that means that it's just a copy. I'm like, I don't think so. I think if the claim that Jesus is the Logos is true, then the Logos is the true thing. It's the real thing that permeates all cultures over all time. And therefore, you would expect to see allusions to Jesus in it, but not even copycats, even like
ones beforehand too. Like, people trying to make it. I think that some of them are grasping at straws, just trying to grab at stuff.
But also think, like, imagine like 1000 BC, before the Gospels came, and some tribe in the lands of Northern America or Australia or wherever, they've never met an Israelite before. I don't doubt there was people there that were seeking to know their creator, and they probably had become convicted of their own sin and realized there was something more and created these stories. I'm sure that I don't think God was entirely hidden from them. I think God helped all these other different people to recognize the Messiah when he would come into the sort of Hellenized world. And that would mean, you sort of see it with like Paul when he would go to the hill at Athens and be like, this unknown God that you guys have a statue for, he came, his name was Jesus Christ. So it's like these stories that people created to try to make meaning of the world all pointed to the Messiah. You didn't just need to look in the Hebrew scriptures to find Christ. Yeah, he was. I think he was everywhere.
I think it was a lot of it that I think it's hard for me to explore it.
Yeah.
When I'm honest, I think it is. It's hard for me to explore it, and what I mean by that is I trust God to be God and do with what he needs. I do say this, not out of pure ignorance for all and all of humanity, because if, and I've had a conversation with universalists before, especially. And what I mean by this is, maybe it's a universalist conversation with them, but I guess it's kind of like, I look at it, if people aren't punished by what they didn't know on that aspect, then the most harmful thing we could do is go tell them about it, because now they would be acknowledging what, I guess that's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to explain there. If people are saved outside of Christ, not knowing this Messiah, not knowing these sorts of things, now I'm gonna let God be God again.
Just to be clear, I don't believe that.
Well, I don't think he did. I didn't
yeah.
think I didn't think he did. But at the same time, I was just kind of touching on it, is for those that are outside. So I guess I look at like a Romans 3 kind of thing there. I think it's Romans 3. All of creation basically exposing God. Like he's there. You can't kind of really deny it. So everyone has had this, we see the different pagan gods of how people want to worship here, worship there. We all know there's a God. I believe that there's not such thing as an atheist. You can say you're atheist all you want.
I agree with that.
I don't believe that for a second. Yeah. You just want to suppress the truth, as the Bible says.
Atheism at its core gives people an out.
It's a religion. Yeah. It's a religion. It's like wholeheartedly, they're just like, they'll push onto the science thing, and then you get in the conversation, evolution and Big Bang and all those kind of atheist guys, and they're like, well, so it spawned from nothing, so nothing created nothing, and it really just pulls out. It's a religion for them. Yeah, it really is. It's just a different systematic falsehood is that they have there. But what about you, real quick? I didn't hear any Chris ask you this, but I have to ask a little bit. Where do you stand with a couple of the things that I've said so far? I'm very open Calvinist. I've said that. Now, wherever I know some people have said they've drawn back from it a little bit. I'm not a cage state Calvinist running around my Romans 9, thumping it on everyone. I'm not one of those guys, but I'm certainly Calvinistic. And I understand that you are full preterist now, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where did your journey help me a little bit here? Where did your journey and what was your clicking point? So maybe I can see if I'm kind of on the same page.
To preterism.
Yeah.
So it's funny, we were sort of touching on this in the first part of our conversation. I came to faith in 2021, so deep into the whole COVID thing, and became like convinced that we were living in the end times. So, there is a global world government, and there's not a conspiracy hole that I haven't been down, but I'm sort of hyper rational and objective. So I could spend 20 hours looking at flat earth content and not be like triggered by it and think these people are insane. I can look at it and be like, here's their good points, but here's the points I think they're making that are wrong. I reckon I've probably looked at the whole lizard people theory. I think that's that.
I've heard of that.
But I'm like, I don't believe in it, and I don't believe in flat earth either. But so I'm like, I can look at all this stuff. So I came to the view that there is a sort of a global cabal that are trying to totally enslave us, and then that sort of led me into the church, which was sort of it was the wrong way to come to faith, because I don't think my faith was solidified until I became convicted of sin. And I think that's a lesson he said. I sort of I poke at the bear with a few of these sort of Christian conspiracy theorists, on X, and they're just rattling on about other people's evil all the time. You're like, if you don't think Christ has come to solve a problem in your own heart, then brother, you've got it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And your faith isn't built on much, So I say that to make the point that I was like hardcore focused on, like, I could see all the conspiracies. I could see everything that was happening. And a lot of these things are real. Like, they are happening. I now hold the view that this stuff is not as coordinated as we would like to think. I think the world is a lot more chaotic. It's just a lot more chaotic, and the sin of man combining with other sin of men to try to establish dominion. It's what everyone's trying to do. But they can never do it. Nothing's new under the sun. It's been tried over and over and over. So I sort of became convinced of this sort of cabal, but then I was reading. So I was desperate to try to understand the end times. It was my main when I'm reading the Bible and studying the Bible. I'm listening to Revelation studies. I'm reading Revelation. I'm reading Daniel. I'm doing that a whole lot more than I'm reading the Gospels. And then I just kept getting stuck. Like, I'd land on different ideas, and you see this online where you've got your pre-trib guys, your post-trib guys, and they all have their system, and they land on basically the exact same thing because they've got their verses that they have to use to make their system work. And then you got the other guys that have a different system that take a different view on those verses. So everyone's in all these camps. But one thing with me is I can't convince myself that something is truth if I know deep down that it's not. So I was sort of like a pre-trib. I sort of journeyed into dispensationalism, but not too much, because I was always like, I saw how corrupt Israel, 1948 Israel was. So I didn't really ever see them as fulfillment. I thought people trying to say they were fulfillment was pushing a bit. So I had all these different positions. I was like, none of it works. I was like, there's verses that destroy my position here. I know I'm wrong. I don't know what it is, but I know this system. There's something I'm missing here. And I was just watching heaps of YouTube studies on it, and then I was like, I'm just gonna throw all this out and I need just a refresher. And then I went and read. I actually think the first thing I did was I read something about Daniel 9. Daniel 9 is such a linchpin verse for end times. And I remember reading this thing saying that, here's the different interpretations of it. And there's also this very fringe interpretation that Martin Luther had, that Daniel 9:27 was actually talking about the Messiah. And when I first read that, I was like, well, that's a bit that's ridiculous. This is an Antichrist verse. But I don't know, something about that stuck. And then I went and just read it for myself. I stopped reading commentaries. I stopped watching YouTube videos.
Yeah, just read the text.
And I was like, I read Daniel 9. I'm like, this is just all about Jesus. How on earth am I putting in here this sort of Antichrist? And then that led me to, and then I was like, okay, so if you make Daniel 9:27 about Jesus, not Antichrist, well, then that opens up everything everywhere else. So then I saw, and then I started to see all these time statements and all this other stuff. I'm like, this has happened. There's been something, where I went first. I don't know whether I've mentioned this. I don't know whether you knew it, but I then got to the Little Season thesis. Have you come across that?
Mm-hmm.
A Little Season thesis is insanity, but it's almost true. Like, they get a lot right. So what most Little Season guys are like what I was back then. You see all the evidence of a first century parousia and the imminency of all of the New Testament scriptures. But then you look at the world around you and you're like, well, there's evil everywhere. There's all these conspiracies. Satan's everywhere. They're trying to do this to us. They're trying to do that. Therefore, the only system that works, because of course, no one's thinking full preterism at that point, is to say that we're in the little season of Revelation 27 to 10.
Okay. I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Where it all happens, and then Satan will be released for a short season, and then there's the Gog and Magog, and then he's devoured. So I landed in little season. I tell you what, if you want to go down some crazy rabbit holes, look at the little season guys and the theories they come up with. So they'll be like, the camp of the saints is actually Jesus with all the believers of the first 1,000 years, and they're in the North Pole at the moment. And they've set up a camp at the saints. It gets completely insane. And then there's all these conspiracies around America and Russia have some plan to, they're hiding things in the North Pole, and there's going to be a global government that's going to be established, and the whole world is going to go against the aliens that they say are in the North Pole.
Gosh.
So I say it. I mean, it's complete madness, right? So I was in this little season sort of because I thought it was the only way that the scriptures worked. I was in this idea for maybe a month or two, and I was like, this is just, there's too much madness in this. And then the big thing that shifted for me was just seeing that what was the kingdom and what was established and what was meant to happen, and who is Satan? What is Satan? And then it's verses like, Isaiah 66 and 2 Peter 3:10, I think it is, about like what this new heaven and earth would be, and how there's still sinners there. There's still people dying there. There's
21.
Yeah. And I was like, well, hang on. I think I've just got wrong what was promised. And then I started to look at what was promised. And then I think I don't have it all worked out. And maybe then this will segue into some questions I've got for you on it around, I don't know what it means in terms of, is there ever an end of this physical world? What happens exactly when we die? Is this the kingdom fully realized here, or is this a new heaven and earth and we just live on the new earth, but the new heaven is where we go for eternity? And within preterism, no one agrees on any of these points. It just gets back to the same pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib. There's individual body preterists that all have their verses, and then there's corporate body preterists that all have those verses. So the more and more I get to this, and this is what gets me to this whole sort of sola scriptura argument, is like, I just don't think the New Testament is ever sought to tell us a story about everything that would happen from the end of the first century up until the end of the world. It's just, it's telling us a story about the creation of the new covenant, which has been created. And then, so that's where I've got to now. I've been wrong too many times to be too set on anything. I'm certain there's elements of full preterism that I've got wrong, but I clearly see fulfillment, and I see the establishment of something great and something grand that I think has transformed and taken over the world.
I think I haven't got into those guys, the short season. Maybe I've just been in a box a little bit, but some stuff I scroll right past some people, and I don't listen to some things. It's interesting what you said is somehow when you're reading the text, it's the fulfillment, and to where you just hedged Daniel 9. You was reading with the same lens I was. We had this set of lens of a system that you're reading onto the text. And I don't know, man. I came out of the dispensational thing. I think when I started to shift to my little Calvinistic kind of soteriology, that's where I started to kind of really shift. I guess that was about 20. I guess I've been a Calvinist probably about 7 years, 6-7 years, give or take.
Yeah.
And that's when I started shifting to all millennial. Maybe that was a little bit of influence and stuff like that. If I'm truly honest, maybe some of that I fit around more guys that I was around. Beards, tattoos, cigars, and whiskey. It's just like, maybe I gravitated to that a little bit, but I started to listen to some. And then y'all mentioned Jeff Durbin, and he has been a huge blessing. I believe not only just to myself, to a lot of people. I think there's certainly people in history that the Lord has used with a profound outreach, and he helped me with Matthew 24 as well. And then when I started reading the time statements, that's what really broke me, was the time statements. When I really started to pay attention to them, because now I'm like, I don't understand how dispensationalists are dispensationalists. If you just read the text without the system, I don't understand how you are a pre-tribulation raptured dispensationalist. I don't.
I mean, everyone, like, it's like people point at, they're like, oh, but read Romans 11, read Romans 11. I'll say, yeah, look at verse 5. It says, at this present time. Like,
Amen. And there's so many of those timestamps, man. And
people ignore them. That's
they do.
People just flat out, and someone said it, and I think they summed it up well. When it comes to sort of seeing fulfillment, it's like you reach a point where you just decide, I'm going to stop ignoring the time texts. You either take them seriously or you ignore them.
Amen. And the gap theories of stuff that they're doing between, Daniel, I think it's between Daniel 25, 26 or 24, 25, somewhere in there, where they stick the gap, this church age gap, and then they do the same thing with the book of Revelation. They're like, well, I ask all the time, well, what about John in verse 1 and verse 3, where he says the time's near and soon to come? And even places in verse 9, he's like, I'm part of this tribulation. Like, he's placing himself in this. And they're like, well, no, in chapter 4, verse 1, John is caught up, and they're like, well, this is the rapture. This is where the church leaves. And then the church isn't mentioned anymore. I'm like, so who are the saints here, bro? Are we not serving the same Christ? The same, like, what are you talking about?
I think it's I mean, I'll be blatant with it. People hate, this is not sort of judging. I don't know anyone's individual heart, but a lot of these people, I think, follow a totally different faith to what I do.
Amen. I was going to say that. I said that on X a while ago, and I know, I mean, I love people like John MacArthur. I love Brother John. I do. But you hear, and when your eschatological view really shapes your worldview in every kind of way, and how you're going to live and how you kind of do these things. And it scares me when I watch, and I see it through Twitter all day long, bro. It's just the people that this is a new sign that God's coming soon. This is going to be soon. This is happening soon. And it's like, bro, when do we
take me home? I want to get out of this place.
It's escapism. And it's Jeff did a good video with I think it was Dr. Sanders, I think his name is, semi-Gnosticism, and it's escapism, and it does have a lot of the same tendencies as this, God of the Old Testament, and we have the New Testament here, and it's like, well, they're not in difference to each other, bro, in any kind of way. But it's this, I want to escape, and it's just like, why are we polishing brass on a sinking ship? We're about to leave, and it's just like, bro, like, what are you doing? And then they go through these things and they share these verses and stuff, and they're just like, this proves this. And I'm like, I want to have more respect. And it irritates me, bro. It does. And I don't know if it's a righteous anger. I don't know if it's just what it is about. I don't know. But it sometimes really bothers me. I'm like, why are you just doing that, bro? Like, why are you taking his word and just doing whatever you want to do with it? Just saying it out here, and it's and the pushback. Sometimes I get the pushback. And even sometimes when I'm just trying to be nice and just respectful, if I almost like a spirit from them, I don't want to say like charismatic way, but I'm saying like the spirit of gentleness and stuff like that. They're pretty gentle, and like I'll try to be gentle with people, and it's like you get blocked or you get called a heretic for asking certain questions. Like, dude, I'm just asking the text. But I'm with you, bro. I just started wanting to read the text, and when I see things that the audience relevance, the time statements, and Daniel 12 kicked me in the face, bro. Daniel 12 kicked me, and I think that was the one that was like, you know what? I'm settling here. I don't care what you call me. You can call me what you want to call me, a heretic, an apostate, this, that, and the other. I'm like, all I disagree with you is we have the same gospel. Our gospel isn't any shifted in any kind of way. I believe in the same exact message from this perspective. The only thing I disagree with you guys on them on, even for my post-trib brothers, there's a lot I disagree with on the dispensational brothers. There are brothers and sisters in dispensationalism. I'm not going to say there's not. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
But the partial preterist bros there that, that kind of tendency to pull back. And if I could touch real quick, this is what helped me with the Gary DeMar thing, is how he was treated for asking the questions. Just, hey, we all read it. We all see it, bro. Why are y'all not wanting to answer the questions? And then you got people getting on YouTube just like, Gary DeMar is wrong. He's an apostate. He's this, that, and the other. I'm like,
but I won't have a discussion with him.
Yeah, I want to have this discussion. I want to have these debates. I want to answer these questions and stuff. And it's just like, we're all seeing the same text, bro. And it's like, would I be okay with being wrong as a full preterist? If you can show me as a partial preterist, and I'm open to it 100%, bro, I promise I am. If you are a partial preterist, and you can convince me through the text with great exegesis, hermeneutics, all those sorts of things, and a good Bible study to show me, no, this is actually speaking of a physical resurrection at the end of the cosmos. If you can show me that through the text in any kind of way, I will recant every single thing I said about full preterism, and I have no problem going back to it and be on my hands and knees in prayer, asking the Lord forgive me, 100%. But the more I read it, bro, the more and more I read it, the more I study it. And I've sat right here at my desk with several different Bibles open. I look like that one meme with the guy with the conspiracy thing showing, if you know what I'm talking about, he got his hands up on the board. I've been that guy on this desk, notes, highlighters, pens, studying and prayer. And I believe I don't believe the answer. He said, if you ask me, I will give it to you. And I believe him. And I'm not saying that my prayer has led me to the belief, because guess what? Dispensationalists say the same exact thing.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I'm not going to say that, but I want to.
Oh, you're not led by the Spirit. You just need to let the Spirit. Yeah. Everyone's led by the Spirit, but they all have different interpretations.
Yeah, different everything. But what I want to be led by is just, I believe that we're not stupid. I'm not saying dispensationalists are stupid anymore. There's very intelligent ones. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying is it's where I land. It's where I read it, and I'm reading somebody else's mail. And I want to read that mail with respect. I want to know God in every way I can. Sometimes it's too much. Sometimes I have days where I won't touch it for a couple days. I just have to work it out in my head. I have to get relief. But where I sit is with physical resurrection. That's what pushed me over. It's like, that's where I'm out of the camp of that. What I do with Satan yet, I don't know, Bubs. I still have that conversation. I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
But as for the physical resurrection,
I'm like that on Satan too, to be honest.
It's hard conversation. Yeah. It is a really hard conversation. It's hard to defend anywhere. So I kind of stay away from it. I'm just like, I don't know, bro. Yeah. I don't know what to do with it. I'm still working that out. But as for the physical resurrection, people are like, well, you're not going to have your physical body. Bro, I don't care. It doesn't affect me in any kind of way for myself. Maybe I'm wrong for that. I don't know, man. But I've said it for a long time. You touched on something you said a second ago, or a little while ago, about talking about what happens after death idea. I mean, I believe is in for the aspect is when I am covered by the atonement of Christ. I believe that through my faith, and I believe that when I stand before him, I am not judged upon anything that I've done, but I do believe we give an account, not so much on the sins that we have done. I don't believe that, because he says he cast them as far as the east is from the west. I believe that wholeheartedly. I think it's maybe love for somebody to help me on that if they want, but I think for the stance of that judgment is we are found under Christ, under that blood of an atonement of Christ. And what I'm asked about is not what I've done in my sinfulness, but what have I done to receive the rewards in the body of Christ? What have I done? Yeah. What have I helped to grow the gospel? What seeds have I planted? These sorts of things. But at the same time, I'm with open arms and welcomeness, not because of anything I've done, but because of what he has done on my accounts. When God sees me, he sees that's the atonement. That's straight up the atonement. So when I give up my breath here, I believe that I stand before him right then. I believe that the resurrection that it speaks about, especially in John 5, is that I've been brought from death to life. That is my resurrection. My physical tent will fall, but I have a better body by God, in 2 Corinthians 5, that is waiting for me, a heavenly temple, a heavenly tent that is with him, seated with Christ. That's the one that I will receive. I'm not worried about this physical body to come back later, because I believe that when I stand before God, I am made perfect in all righteousness right then, not waiting for my body to be perfect. I think that that's the stance that I will receive. And for myself, and I've said it a long time, this is where my heart sits, is that my heaven, my glorification, I don't want it, bro. I'm okay with being behind 2 billion other saints and Christians in the far, far back, just to be climbing up in a tree to see him walk by. I got no problem saying that. I got no problem being that guy, to see him in the distance, to lay eyes upon the true Messiah. I have no problem with saying that at all. But I hope this is for me and him. I hope is that when I give up my breath here, and that I trust in his atonement and his work, that the first thing I get to do, the first thing, is to squeeze him and cry. That's what I want. Not from what I've done, not from all these sorts of things, but out of pure bliss and thankfulness for what our Messiah has truly done for us, because I don't deserve it and nobody else deserved it. And I believe wholeheartedly is that this is the point, especially with the new covenant, is that he has done what we could not do. We couldn't do it. We fail. King after king after king, leader after leader after leader failed. And when I read guys like about Psalms 51, our brothers like David, that murdered a man and slept with a woman and fell to his knees in prayer and agony, and I feel his tears. And I believe when somebody like that in that was called a man after God's own heart, brothers like that, that gives me hope.
Yeah.
Not that I've killed anyone. That's what I'm saying. But I'm saying is that not that it, but I've done sins just as much as send me to hell.
Yeah.
Let me say that real quick.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that kind of thing gives us hope. And the Messiah, and I'm not waiting for a Messiah to show up later on. My Messiah showed up. And he did what he was going to do. And he brought that covenant and put an end to sin, as he said in Romans or in Daniel 9.
Yeah.
He put an end to it. And not as if we just stopped sinning. No. He made an atonement for the sin. And where there is no law, there is no sin. He did away with that. Absolutely.
So what about, Steve, what do you think about, there's hang-ups that people have when they start to see fulfillment. What's your thoughts, like, let's say something like the Apostles' Creed, that he'll come to judge the living and the dead. Do you think there's how do you understand ideas like judgment for the unrighteous and the unbeliever now,
I think
2,000 years on?
I think for the same perspective, everyone dies.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I try to come back to, where people's like, all right, well, the end of and the creed thing, I'm kind of with. I got a problem with the creed. Just point me to the chapter and verse how you got there. What are you saying here? What text can I look at here to help me with that there? Because I have no problem with saying, well, the earth fled, the skies rolled up, all these sorts of things happened. And even for my partial preterist brothers, they have no problem saying, well, this book of Revelation, especially a lot of them like Ken Gentry or anyone, says, well, the majority of the book of Revelation is in the past. Really? Yeah. You agree with that? Okay, cool. Then why is in Revelation 11 we're speaking about a final judgment? It's in Revelation 11. You stick it in the past. Oh, you want to pull that out of its place and then stick it with Revelation 20 and then put it in our future, but all these other things. So I think the judgment there, it's a very hard understanding there for me. I think a lot of the judgment was upon Israel at that point. I think that was the entire point of that. And I think it's always going back to apocalyptic language. I don't know, my video died, but can you still hear me audibly?
Yeah, and I can still see your video too.
Okay, I think it died though. Something went wrong with it. I'm going to plug it and keep going. I think it was all about Israel in that perspective. I'm going to try to kill my cam and then bring it back up in a second. Now, what happens beyond that, I believe the same thing applies to them as it does us. We are appointed to die once and then judgment. Yeah. So you either are going to away from Christ or to be with Christ. That's what it's going to boil down to. My cam just stopped, so I'll just leave this off. It's fine.
No, that's all right. I have you come across Sean McMahon yet?
Sean was on. The name's not ringing a bell.
Sean did an episode with me. Yeah, so Sean's a full preterist who became Catholic like a year ago. And he's done some really interesting studies, sort of trying to reconcile the two and reconcile our understanding of things like judgment and resurrection, about how perhaps the church has got it wrong over time. And he was talking about, he's like, people say, well, how can you be a Catholic and you don't completely agree with the Apostles' Creed? And he's like, I'm not sure I don't agree with it. And then we were discussing, I said, like, look at 12, because he would say, I still believe that he will come to judge the living and the dead. And then we were like, look at Luke 12, 35 to 48, right? and it starts, be dressed in readiness and keep your lamps lit, like men who are waiting for their master when he returns from the wedding feast, so that they may immediately open the door to him when he comes and knocks.
Like Matthew 25, basically.
Well, yeah, but what's interesting, then he goes, he says, blessed are those who the master will find alert when he comes, and then he said, be sure of this, the head of the house knowing what hour the thief was coming, he would not be allowed into his house to be broken into. And then Peter said, are you addressing this parable to us or to everyone else as well? And then who then is the faithful and sensible steward whom his master will put in charge of his servants to give them rations at the proper time? Blessed is that slave from whom his master finds so doing when he comes. But if the slave says in his heart, my master will be a long time in coming, and begins to beat the slaves, both men and women, and eat and drink, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour that he does not know him, and cut him into pieces and assign him in a place with the unbelievers. So that's talking about, and then that exact same language is used in Matthew 24 about the parousia and the coming at the end. If you read that in Luke 12, that's talking about a very individual, like where he says, but if this slave says this, then he'll come at a different time. That's sort of suggesting to me like an ongoing parousia and an ongoing judgment that is very much like individual. So it could be that like Matthew 24 is talking about the sign of his coming. Like what's going to be the sign that the parousia is here? And that's talking about the end of Israel. But then from that point forward, I could read Luke 12:35 to 48 and think, well, that can be talking about a first century Israelite, just like it could be talking about a 21st century American or Australian, that maybe, and it's the same as like Martha and Mary when they're disputing Lazarus, and Jesus says, what's going to happen? They say, oh, well, we know on the last day he'll be raised up. And Jesus is like, nah, I am the resurrection. Like, forget this idea you have about a last day resurrection of your body. Like, I'm here. So it's like, I'm leaning towards this idea, and I'm still working it out. I'm sure I've got it wrong, but maybe like the judgment and the resurrection can be an ongoing thing, an ongoing reality through all of time.
I'm not against that in that same individual aspect. And I look at this one from chapter 12, which you was reading in 35 through 48. Well, I look at the beginning. Well, there was thousands around him.
Yeah.
So he's not speaking directly just to his apostles, but he's speaking to everyone. So this is a broad statement in which he's saying all these sorts of things. So absolutely, I think this could be to the individual. Now, I think of things like the hour coming, you didn't expect him. I think this gives language, kind of like the Olivet Discourse. Is this referencing to 70 AD? Possibly. But I think the broader aspect there too is, just the hour you don't expect. I mean, some people know when they're about to die. I mean, whether you're in sickness and stuff like that. But overall, the hour doesn't be ready. I think the principle to that is you should be ready. Everyone should be ready. The same kind of what I said, Matthew 25. Have your lampstands kind of ready with oil in them, plenty to be, burned. This could be a bit, or it can be at any given moment. Now, I don't, as in for the whole judgment thing, is if I want to be a full preterist, I have to be consistent in my full preterist view, and I want to hold that as like I'm saying, well, the great white judgment, I believe that was pointed towards Israel at this point, has to do with them. Now, does God come back and clean it up? Not really. He said, obviously we have no Vedic covenant, so he's not going to destroy the world with water anymore. But he didn't say fire. He didn't say this. He didn't say, no, I don't think God's one of those kind of ways. I think that the things that he made and he called good. And when God calls something good, it is good. I don't see a reason for
burning up the earth.
Yeah, I mean, just like, the kingdom's here. I see these sorts of things. These, it didn't come with observation, as he said, other than the signs of his coming. But that wasn't just a coming for like the end of the cosmos. That was a coming. This is the Messiah, the promised Messiah. He's quoting Daniel 9 so much in all this. Daniel 7. So I think this was the enthronement. This is an ascension language, not descension. Like this, not him not coming back. This was his ascension and being seated at the throne. This reflects Daniel 7, Revelation 1, Revelation 11. All these things are the same kind of language of judgment. So it's kind of, I don't know. I think the individualistic kind of view is on point. Honestly,
Yeah.
I think it's very on point. As a corporate, bro, I don't know. I mean, as we said originally, we feel like this is the end of the old covenant into the new covenant. And that's what the Bible is talking about. It's what its focus point is. If he's going to come back and destroy what I don't know. I don't know. I don't think the Bible speaks of that. So it's where it's silent, I'm going to be silent.
Spot on. Yeah, I think. I mean, I've seen it. Like guys in preterism are super smart and really, really good with their scriptures, more than any other sort of
Well, at least consistency wise, I give them.
Yeah, and
some are kind of
like this.
far-fetched.
Yeah, but it's like I know I've had them on as guests on the show. I know two different people that both I would consider in that camp, and they both have a totally different interpretation of one element of it. Now that just tells me that we're not given the full story.
Yeah, I mean,
and there are things that we're silent on. I think when we try to piece every single element of it together, we end up losing our consistency.
No, I mean, you're right. You're right. I think precepts start taking over, and we start to try to let our mind wander and put things in there that aren't supposed to be there.
Yeah,
I'd have been part of the greatest Bible study ever, and that's when Jesus revealed all the things about himself in scriptures. I mean, that'd have been the greatest Bible study ever. To understand.
And can you imagine how many of these smart students of the scriptures were just totally wrong?
And I'm okay with being wrong on a lot of things. I am. I have no problem with that. When I read about the gospel and I look back to, I pointed out to a lot of people that are like, well, the gospel is Revelation, or I'm sorry, 1 Corinthians 15, verse 1 through 4. Well, yeah, that's the first importancy, but I think there's more to that. You should keep reading, bro. And I think a kingdom is a big part of his message. I mean, when Jesus comes in, his first words in his ministry, bro, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Those are his first words in his ministry after he's baptized. So it's like there's something about this kingdom that has to be presented. There's something about this sitting on a throne, this Messiah, this promised Messiah, that has to be presented. So that's where I get into that's where I kind of shy against dispensationalists. They're like, well, Satan is the god of this world, and
Jesus is so just utterly defeatist.
Yeah, and it's like, bro, like, what are you talking about? Like, and they're like, no, he's gonna come down here and sit on an actual throne. Like, you want to sit on a throne made by hands? Come on, bro. Like, just and that kind of bothers me. And I got to touch a second with the Satan thing before it loses my mind. Where I said I don't understand what to do with him, but I don't want to think of him in a way at the same and I'm guilty of this, bro. And I think many, many Christians are. And I don't want to, I'm so guilty of it. I don't want to think of Satan in an omnipresent way. I don't want to think of him that way, of any
make him as God.
Like God. Yeah, you're making him just like God. And it's like, can Satan speak into my mind kind of things? Is he God or is he Satan? He had to show up in a serpent to talk to Eve. Like, he didn't just speak to her in her head. He spoke audibly to her from a snake kind of things. And so I don't know what to do with Satan, but I know the precepts I've had of Satan, this horns and living in hell and like I don't know what to do with him. The binding of him I was cool with. As a partial preterist, post-millennial, I had no problem. Like, yep, he's bound. We have all of these texts that are showing that he's bound, these sorts of things. And then once I shifted to full, it's like, bro, I don't know what to do with this, him being defeated. I don't know what to do with this. And I kind of do go back to, well, man, as sinner, I don't need Satan running around here telling me to sin. I'm pretty good at it myself. I don't need him to do that.
I'm the same. I look at my own life.
He don't need to help me.
I don't need any. No,
he can, But
so I'll tell you where I sort of sit on it is I think the New Testament is telling the story of, it's telling the grander story, but one element of that story is Satan being the adversary to the true children of God, who was the corrupted old covenant priesthood, being defeated, being bound. And I think that all happened. Now, what a lot of preterists will do, and this is certainly what I did for an element, is that they'll say Satan is 100% the old covenant corrupt priesthood. And there's no such thing as, therefore there's no such thing as Satan anymore. But where I think I'm starting to move to where I disagree with that is if Satan is the adversary, and an adversary that God can raise up to sharpen his church, I think, at times, and to test us and to challenge us, then just because the Satan of the New Testament was destroyed doesn't mean there can't be more Satans moving forward. And I think there's ample evidence of Satans in the world and Satans who come up against the church. So I don't take the view that Satan is an individual spirit that takes on the form. I think it's a spiritual adversary that the one that we read about in the New Testament is gone, but that can continue to exist forever. I don't think we're ever promised a world where we're not given exactly. Yeah, but it was, the accuser under the law is different because you and I were never born under the Mosaic law. It was gone 1900 years ago. So it's and that's, the accuser under the law was this old covenant corrupt priesthood who would, strain at a gnat, as Jesus, said with them, but then go and swallow a camel. So that accuser isn't there for us, but we have all sorts of spiritual adversaries, and they sharpen us, and they're for our good. Same as when, God sent a Satan, an adversary to David in Chronicles, to number the children of Israel. He used Satans all the time. Used adversaries in Job to test and challenge Job for his good. So
that's a solid point. That you just got my mind racing in different places just then.
My position might change on it. That's just sort of where I am.
I don't know if I have a position because I said I don't really know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I had to not give him the attributes of God in any kind of way. So I don't know what to do with it. Maybe God will show me something to do with it. But I don't know. Maybe it's something I need to study more of many of them. I do see things like in Revelation where it's, the power of Satan, like he's given this power by him. I think if you look at Job, there's aspects of ways that seems like almost like a concept, and I'm not. I don't want to say it that way because I feel like that'd be a blasphemous way of saying. I don't want to say it. There's a ways, and storms or taking of life, things he was able to do towards Job, only with the permission of God.
Well, then there's Judas. So I was reading this last week, being sort of Holy Week. There's the gospel account of Jesus's passion. And it's they're at the Last Supper, and then Judas is there, and then it says, and then Satan entered into him. Now, I don't really have a good answer for that. That's my description I've just given then doesn't really. How does an adversary enter into him? I can see how he became an adversary, but that certainly does read as though some spirit entered into him. Which is, I've sort of changed my tune on spirits and demonology. I would have said that demons, certainly the covenant creation guys will say, now demons are just an analogy to talk about, infirmities of some sort. But then I've spoken to too many people that have these vivid experiences of demons and sort of possession. I don't know. It's said that I'm not sure I can totally deny that. But then you read, I think it's in Samuel or Chronicles, where Saul gets possessed by a wicked spirit that had been sent by God, and David calms him by playing the harp to him. So that sort of suggests to me that, yeah, evil spirits are real things, and I'm not sure they were intended to be done away with entirely at 70 AD. I disagree with this idea that some of the, what I call Satan worshippers have, that these spirits are omnipresent and omnipotent and can just enter into people at will. I don't know. I think we all maybe have our ideas around demons and spirits a bit wrong. I think they're real, but maybe we need to realize where
It
they
kind of
come
comes to
from.
question too when he asked Peter said to Jesus about when he said he was going to be crucified, and he had to rebuke Peter by calling it "Get behind me, Satan." Like, well, you imagine how Peter felt? Like, what do you mean, bro? Like, what do you call me Satan for? Like, but it was something trying to stop.
Well, I mean, that makes sense in terms of the word study of adversary. Like, get behind me, Peter. You're being an adversary to me and to the plans of the cross. I don't need you. What you're saying here is it is against what needs to happen. You are being an adversary. I don't think it's like, I don't take this idea that Peter's all of a sudden quickly possessed by a wicked horn-bearing spirit that he's trying to stop Jesus.
Well, I mean, it's just in the way he said it. So, I mean, I try to look at it as the broader perspective, that is anything that's a hindrance for the gospel or the kingdom or anything that's going to, I mean, why did he say the gates of hell would never prevail against it? Like why language this way? I mean, these are deep thoughts that I don't know if we'll ever. I mean, the Bible, we can get hints of it, but these are things that might be silent. Now, the possession part, when you said that, I got a thought of that, and to do away with, I can't quote it at the moment. It might be John, but when he takes the pig, he casts them out of the
pigs,
and into the pigs. Their statement was to him are you to judge us before our appointed time? That's something that comes to mind when you said that, and what it I think about on stuff like is like they knew there was an appointed time of judgment. Like they knew it, and he didn't destroy them. He didn't do anything like that. Well, I mean, however you want to see it, he destroyed the pigs at least. I mean, we don't know if the demons, directly was destroyed in that instant, but we got an appointed time. We got a timestamp right there.
So, there's a whole theory on that. I'm not sure on the pig story. I think any explanation of it, there's totally different camps on it. Every explanation of it is maybe missing something, but I've heard a really good explanation of what's going on in that story, and that it's, again, just using pigs as sort of an analogy for unclean and unclean spirits, which makes sense. And that's like, why would you come to torment us before the time, it says, which I always, particularly as a futurist, was like, well, that's, their time hasn't yet come. These wicked spirits are given a period of time until they're going to be destroyed at the end of world history. But what that may have been talking about is, at that time in Jerusalem, you had these basically lunatics who were sort of out on the street in these areas, these guys were, and, possessed by something, whether that was supernatural spirits or whether it was just mental infirmities. And the men of Israel would go out at evening for dinner, and part of their entertainment, they would go past these lunatics and sort of torment them on the streets to get a bit of a laugh out of them. And because Jesus was there walking with the apostles sort of during the daytime, and he walked up to them, they're like, why are you coming to torment us now? Like, it's not dinner time yet. It's not evening when you usually come and play games with us. So it's I'm not saying that's the answer of what's going on there, but it's an entirely different way of reading the text than what the sort of mainstream idea of it is.
So the time being not so much as a destruction time, but just
like 7 p.m. at night. 7 p.m. at night, when all the men of Israel walk to their usual time of dinner and come past us and stir us up and get a laugh out of us because we're like the clowns of the town. Why are you doing this in the daytime? This is what happens at night.
It's a good thought. I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know what to do with that. So, but it's hard to deal with. There's a lot of questions. I mean, I thought I got so many answers. Shifting into full preterism, And I still have so many. It created
It gives a lot of
lot.
answers. It gives you more questions now.
It does, but I know that it's more consistent.
Yeah.
That's the big thing for me, is it's just so much more consistent. And bro, I feel like in a lot of ways it's strengthened my faith.
Yeah.
I don't feel like, I've heard some people talk about, why they left full preterism. It was dark, gloomy, this, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't get that, bro. Like, I don't.
No, neither do I.
I don't. I think, and most of the time it's just misrepresentation. And that's what I was seeked out to do, is when I was first studying this topic with the Gary thing. I'm asking questions and I'm like, dang, that is a good question, bro. Like, so what is y'all's response? And it's like, oh, crickets or silence or write him off. Or I'm like, David, that's not how we do this. Like,
yeah.
And I would love to see, we got guys like Dr. Preston. If you know who Don Preston is, super good.
Yeah.
Super, super smart. And I've heard all kinds of stuff about him, but I think I would love to see because I think it was, I hope I don't misrepresent him, but Doug Wilson, I think it was talking about references. Well, it's not really a big thing yet. People shouldn't, kind of worry about this. It's not like it's a big thing on the stage. Like, bro, like, you have no problem calling dispensationalists. I say it, bro. And I say it. I was guilty of it as well. But I think when you call the Messiah, the Prince, an Antichrist, in Daniel 9,
pretty big deal.
That's blasphemy, bro. Like, you're like, and you have no problem with congregating with them, communion with them, all these sorts of things, with all these people that do this stuff. You have no problem with that. But here we are. Most of us Reformed brothers, most of us are very onto the same page about 99% of the stuff. They're like, okay, well, we don't agree with a physical resurrection or a judgment at the end of cosmos kind of thing. And it's like, oh, well, now we're apostates. Like, we're no longer your brothers. Like, bro, like, I would love to see a big debate. I would love to see it, get a lot of answers out there.
I think these guys like Wilson and co, they know they can't win the debate, and they have a pretty they have a pretty successful, but successful in terms of monetary and power and prestige ministry that is based around not losing a debate.
Yeah.
So I think they're protective of their brand, which sort of sickens me, really.
It sickens me as well. I just don't like being wrote off. I mean, it's just kind of whatever, and I love my brothers in Reformed faith and my partial preterists. I'm not like, hey, I'm a full preterist for the rest of you are apostate heretics. Absolutely not. I'm not that way, bro. Like, I'm not. I just want to challenge each other, sharpen each other. And I'm still seeking a lot of answers. As I said a little while ago, I will gladly recant if you can show me that I'm wrong. But the more I read and the more I study, I don't feel that way at all. But for them on that perspective, like, I wish we would just all have a seat at the table, hash these things out, discuss them, and maybe we glorify God in the things that we do agree with wholeheartedly. I really do.
Amen to that. Well, Steve, it's been an awesome chat, man. We've been trying to sort of tee up this for
I know
ages,
it's been on different clocks.
Yeah, I know
it is something else, man. But man, I'm very thankful that you've let me on here to conversate with you. Obviously, it's the first time we ever conversated vocally, other than just over X. It's been a privilege to discuss with you, especially about everything we're trying to figure out. But from deepest parts of my heart, man, I really appreciate you. Keep doing what you're doing, and just thank you, bro. Honestly, just thank you.
Appreciate that, brother. And I love the way you go about it. I love there's such a clear humility with you, both in the way that you talk about your own faith, the way that you see people outside of the faith, and the way that you've been able to change positions on things and not to judge people that don't agree with you. I love the way you go about it. It's been a refreshing testimony. So thank you for giving it.
I appreciate you, bro. Man, God have all the glory, though. Honestly, let him have all the glory. But thank you, brother. And until next time, I will get with you, man.
Sounds good. See you, Steve. Bro. You do the same.
Or good day, I should say.
Good day for me.